Yeah, mates, this is a little different video for today. It's regarding the treasury situation and the budgetary deficit and that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of math for this video, but really wanted to make a point and cross that with you. So here's the federal budget from last year, so 2023. As you can see, in terms of revenue, $4.4 trillion. Expenditures, 6.1 trillion. And I see that it's not really visible on OBS, so let's just zoom in for a little bit. That is easier to read. Alright. So, 4 trillion. Half of it comes from the income tax, and then another third comes from the Social Security and retirement taxes. Thanks, Joe Biden. Corporate tax is about 10% of the revenue, and basically every single other thing like excise, estate tax, customs, that's about 5% of the revenue. So, take that into account, half the revenue is income tax. Then we go to the federal budget, the expenses. So, the largest expense is, I think that's this one, Department of Health and Human Services. Number 2 is the Social Security Administration. Number 3 is the Treasury Department, and this is mostly debt repayment. Number 4 is defense spending. So, let's go. Health and Human Services. That's this little beast. $1 trillion in Medicare spending. And I believe that is the largest post over the entirety of the thing, of the budget. So, $1 trillion in this. Medicaid, another $600 billion. National Institute of Health gets $46 billion. The families and Administration for Families and Children, that is $88 billion in total. FDA gets $3 billion. And there are a bunch of receipts that have to be itemized, but in this particular case, it's still money that the federal government gets back, so that's about $180 billion. So, next up, Department of Social Security. That is a little lower here. So you have the old age and survivors insurance. Basically, that is your Social Security tax, $1.2 trillion. Then you have the disability insurance, which is $150 billion. Supplemental Social Security, which is $64 billion. And then there are a bunch of itemized receipts, either on budget or off budget, which brings us to $1.4 trillion. Now, let's go back to the Treasury Department. And I want you to show you this. Debt repayment is $880 billion annually. Everything else basically is non-existent. So when it comes to the IRS, you have the refundable credits. It's about $160 billion. And the total budget for the IRS is $250 billion. Anything else important to state here? No. So this is all numbers from the 2023 report, which was released by the Treasury of Secretary, or the Secretary of Treasury, Janet Yellen. So, as you can see, we go from $4.4 trillion in income to 6.1 in expenditures. And this is the actual one, not the expected one. So this is about $300 to $400 billion in savings. As you can see, any individual that wants to balance the budget but doesn't want to touch Social Security or Medicare or defense spending, you will not under any circumstance receive that desired budgetary surplus. You have to take those three. So here we go. First graph, this is the federal revenue, and as you can see, income tax 49%, Social Security or social insurance tax, which is about 36%, corporate tax 9%, and then everything else is basically negligible. This entire pie is 4.4 trillion. as you can see. And I'm going to show you a few things later down the video regarding my proposed budget. Here's the spending, and as you can see, Health and Human Services is the biggest contributor. Then the Social Security Administration, followed by the Treasury, which is debt repayment, and then Defense. So when I see a lot of left-wing people complaining about defense spending, it's not even in the top. If you exclude debt repayment, then it would be the third highest department spending. But 25 and 21, so about half the budget is social welfare. That's just a fact. So let's go. I've done the same thing for each individual state, and you'll find that not a single state has a budgetary surplus, as you can see also in this chart. I'm going to zoom in here as well. That's a little too much. Let's do 150%. Alright, so as you can see, California and Texas, highest budgetary deficit. California because, you know, socialist spending. Texas is because of mostly the border crisis. New York, Florida, Pennsylvania has a higher budgetary deficit than Florida does. Difference between conservative and liberal leadership. And here's the funny one. This is the debt of each individual state. On the horizontal axis, the population of the state. So the amount of people that live in the state with the debt. Now, as you can expect, it is a direct correlation. R square of 95%, which essentially translates to a correlation coefficient, and I'm just going to do this for you. Square root of 0.9416. Let's go. A 97% correlation, essentially what this means. So you have causation and you have correlation. Those are two technical different things within statistics. Regression analysis like this, the R square would be the correlation coefficient, and if you want to determine causality, you take the root of that. That's what R means. So you have 97% correlation between the population and the debt that each individual state has, of course. Now, in terms of binary, you can also bucket these two in the categories of make a chart of exclusively Republican states, then a chart of Democrat states, and a chart with split governments. And then you can see, okay, maybe there's a little bit of a discrepancy regarding budgetary surplus. And then you may look at the RC, so the forgot the term. Basically, you have a line, a linear line. You have the AX plus B, and in this particular case, the A is the direction coefficient, I suppose. That is going to be larger or smaller depending on which state is in control or which party is in control. I should do that analysis maybe later or maybe in a different video if there's actually someone who wants to listen to that a bit more thoroughly. What you can see, the state with the lowest debt to GDP ratio is Wyoming. Of course, there's basically no one there. However, as you can see, they do have a nearly 200% budgetary spending to revenue ratio. And the smallest for this one, I believe, is Utah. No, it's Connecticut, 106%. So they basically have a balanced budget as one of the few states. But then again, they still have a ridiculous amount of debt. So, in total, the debt of each individual state is roughly, on average, $10,000 per citizen. With, of course, outliers in states like California. The highest being New York. But that's to be expected. Individuals that aren't fiscally responsible, particularly Democrat states, they have higher debt percentage. Now, let's go to the solving of the issue. 10 minutes in. Nice. So, this is the US debt clock. Numbers, at the moment, you can just go to the debt clock and figure out GDP is roughly $28 trillion. According to them, the revenue is 4.7 trillion, expenditure 6.6. Grain of salt, I suppose. But this would include 2024 spending, so that includes every single Ukraine bailout payment that Biden is doing to protect himself from being exposed for the quid pro quo with Burisma. Budgetary deficit, obviously revenue minus spending. Ratio, the national debt, debt to GDP ratio, and the individual debt per citizen. Obvious, right? So, I also took the liberty to calculate the percentage of revenue as of GDP and the spending. So you can find it's roughly 17% in terms of spending, or in terms of revenue, 23.7 in terms of spending. And now I wanted to propose to you my idea of solving the budgetary issue. So, one of the presidential candidates for the Republican Party, Larry Elder, or you should say Lawrence Elder if you want to do his actual birth name, ran for the governorship in 2021, and the Republican Party decided they didn't want to have someone jump the proverbial totem pole to be at the top of the ticket. They wanted Kevin Faulconer, the California GOP, and Larry Elder just had that much more recognition. So he got about 48% of the vote in the recall election. However, that is only applicable if the majority of the people in California wanted to recall the governor. Guess what happened? Because Larry Elder was leading the polling, the California GOP and the California Democratic Party started printing ballots to keep Gavin Newsom in place. Because, yes, the Republicans didn't want to have someone jumping the totem pole, and the Democrats didn't want to have a black guy as governor in California. Progressivism. So, then in 2024, Larry Elder ran for the presidency, and he proposed one bill that I was really impressed with, because he did actually the fiscal responsible thing in comparison to that of the other black guy on stage, which would be Tim Scott. So the difference between the two, Tim Scott proposed a balanced budget amendment, which simply states the revenue must be higher than the spending. Since the federal government is incapable of reducing spending, what you're going to get is a mandatory tax revenue increase, which will mostly be translated to an increase in income tax. Mainly a doubling of the income tax in terms of revenue. You know my opinion. If you watch the why libertarians should nominate Donald Trump, you know my opinion on the tax collection. You know that I want the 16th Amendment to be repealed, which is the right for the federal government to levy taxes. So I would propose a limiting in spending as an alternative, which is what Larry Elder proposed. So what did he say? Federal tax revenue must be capped at 10% of the GDP, and the federal spending must be capped at 9% of the GDP, which is this particular bracket here. So we have it, a little bit of comment for me. So that's it. There's no exceptions. There's no rules on what the surplus must do. There's just a mandatory surplus of this particular case, $280 billion. Now, I did the pleasure of hypothetically calculating how long it would take with the Elder Amendment to pay off the national debt, and that would be 124 years. That's not good enough. So what I propose is the Vanderakt Amendment. Yes, humble brag, I made this amendment myself. Go fuck yourself. If you're complaining about this, go fuck yourself. So what does it do? It has the exact same provisions as the Elder Amendment. However, I'm saying revenue can exceed the 10% margin for the sole purpose of repaying debt. And it means American debt. Because otherwise, the government would be like, oh yeah, we're going to pay off the debt of Israel, and then the debt of Germany, and then the debt of Britain, and then France, and then every other NATO ally state. Because we're subsidizing literally everyone except ourselves. That is what DC would do, and you know it. So, I'm saying only US debt can be repaid with the exceeding cap. What does it mean? I just proposed let's keep the revenue the same as it is today. And because we keep it as is, we now have a budgetary surplus of $2.2 trillion instead of $280 billion. Which would make sure that the paying back of the national debt goes from 124 years, to just 16. That's still 4 presidential terms, by the way. That's how deep we are in the hole. Alright. It also says cap federal spending at 9%. However, there's also a little notion that you need to take into account. What if someone declares war on us? Like Japan did in 1942. We may want to exceed that spending cap. So, the only exception that I've put in place is if Congress issues a declaration of war. Not the president, not a judge. Congress has the sole authority to declare war. So if Congress does that, then you can spend more. And I realize that there's one key fault in this, because what Congress is going to do is they're going to declare war to keep Social Security going. Because as you can see, the maximum spending cap that I put in place is $2.5 trillion. Here's what I say. As an addition, the budgetary surplus must be exclusively spent on emergency management, which would be hurricane assistance, flood assistance, forest fires assistance, that kind of stuff, or US debt repayment. Those are the only thing that you can spend the surplus on. Nothing else. And guess what? If there's a budgetary surplus down the line, once the 16 years are up, federal tax revenue will go to the 10% cap, which will give us back to the 200, maybe at that point it would be 300 billion revenue, which would exclusively go to FEMA at that point. So that is my proposal. Now, as you can see, we currently have a spending of 6.6, the other one's at 6.1, and we got to go to 2.5. So how do we do that? This number has to be 2.5. So, as you can see, if we were to delete Social Security, delete the Department of Health and Human Services, and delete the national debt, we're there. However, you're not going to get Social Security deleted, you're not going to get Medicare deleted, so that's a little bit of a problem. So are there any things that individual departments we can do to make it better, to make sure that there are less spending? Now, the first thing we can do is the Department of International Assistance Programs, which would be Foreign Military Aid, that can go. Economic Support and Development Fund, that can go. Military Sales Program, we're selling weapons and making money off it, I'm saying that's fine, that's just pure capitalism, keep it going. International Aid, so the Agency for International Development, that can go. Multilateral assistance, delete. Others, delete. So basically the only thing we keep is the military sales program. So instead of paying $36 billion federally, we gain $13 billion. So that already is a $50 billion towards our direction. So then NASA, $25 billion, we can kind of keep it around. Maybe we can move the resources to space stuff, to SpaceX, I think it was. Elon Musk is doing a lot better than NASA is doing, so maybe just move the resources there and privatize it. National Science Foundation, not really sure what they're doing, but fine, keep it as it is, I suppose. Civil Service Retirement Fund, that's $100 billion that we spend on. Healthcare benefits for Postal Service members, that's fine. So personnel management is not really much we can do about it. Small Business Administration, Do we need that? Probably not. Delete 26 billion back. Yeah, another few things we can get rid of. Postal Service, for an example, privatizes. Federal Express is doing a better job anyway, as is UPS. Just make sure that there's non-discrimination clauses in there and stay as is. So that would save 5 billion. Everything else pretty much fine. Veterans Affairs, we can kind of keep it as is. Maybe we can find ways to cut unnecessary spending. Treasury, this number for public debt, the moment we start paying it, then the interest on the debt is going to decrease, and therefore this will eventually balance out the budget. So it's more of an escalating kind of thing. Imagine pushing a snowball from a mountain, and it's collecting snow as it goes. That's how debt repayment goes. The more you pay off, the less the interest is going to be, and the more you can pay off eventually. So that's how debt repayment works. Coronavirus relief, I think that can be scrapped. Rental assistance can be scrapped. Emergency capital investment, we can scrap that. So that's already a few billion here and there you can save. State Department, refugee assistance, that can be deleted. International organizations, that can be deleted. Global health and child survival, why? Delete. So basically you can defund the State Department for like 75% of their funds and we'll still be fine. Labor Department, there is nothing that I really want to see cut. Maybe you can reduce bureaucracy. Justice Department, well, you can scrap the FBI. That's already a good start. Scrap the ATF. That's already a pretty good start to go with. Interior Department, I think Indian Affairs, that may be a good thing to start going, because they too are American citizens and they too deserve to be treated equally under the law. So maybe it's time to get rid of the entire reservation structure. Not just because everyone needs to be equal under the law, but because in the reservations people have triple the chance of getting addicted to drugs and alcohol. There's more suicide in those reservations. There's less food security. There's less clean water, lower clean water sources. No electricity. Heat is a problem there. So it's basically the wildlife reserves are, or in this case the Indian reserves, are really terrible in terms of living standards. So we can do something about that. Housing and urban development. I think we can scrap that entire department, so that saves us 55 billion. Homeland Security. Secret Service, that's fine. Immigration Services, I think we can cut a little bit here and there. ICE, we can keep that. FEMA's fine. TSA, scrap it. Coast Guard's fine. Customs and Border Protection, maybe they need a little extra funding. Or get leadership that isn't really committing treason on a daily basis, like Mayorkas is doing. So that's fine. Health and Human Services. The FDA, that can go. Substance abuse and mental health services, I think actually that this needs expanding. At least the mental health service part. Indian Health Center, come on, get rid of it and put everyone in the normal system. CDC, a little bit of restructuring needed. For the rest, you can save a few billion here and there. Health resources, that should be further investigated. Regarding child temporary assistance, that's fine. This kind of thing is already good. Medicare, there should definitely be cuts in, as is Medicaid, because otherwise it's not feasible of getting there. Nuclear Security Agency, or administration in this particular case, that's fine. I think we should expand it. because I think we need to go to nuclear energy to fix the entire system. Environment. We can scrap this. Energy programs, that's where the expansion of funds goes mainly to. Marketing, do we really need that? Department of Education, my personal opinion, we can scrap it. However, for some reason, it is making a profit, the Department of Education. So let's just not touch it at the moment, because we can make money with it at the moment, it seems. And that's because of offsetting receipts. So as you can see, student aid, $188 billion. Primary education, $90 billion. Special education, about $20 billion. There's a lot of funding we go in. But I think the start would be to completely defund universities like Harvard, Yale, and those kind of things. Don't spend a federal dollar to it, so that would be post-secondary education. Let's start with that. Innovation improvement, that can be scrapped. However, that's just $1 billion, so who cares? That's not really cutting anything. Military. Construction, that's pretty much fine. R&D, $120 billion. This is a problem with the way that the Secretary of Treasury wrote everything down, because saying R&D doesn't really tell me anything. What are you researching? That's more interesting to me. So this is what you call a surface level budget, and you just do each individual section of a department. I want a detailed calculation, so I want every single project you're doing, every single employee. I want to know exactly what you're doing, what you spend every cent on. Because if you have that kind of detailed finance report, you can really start effectively cutting funds. Because then you can just say, okay, this particular research program does no longer exist. That means no more resources for that program. That means no more employees for that program. I can just immediately slash millions of dollars from the budget. Procurement, operations, and maintenance. Well, we can definitely cut down on the operations, because there's no need for us to have military bases in Syria, or Iraq, or Libya, or Yemen, or Somalia. There's no reason for us to have those bases there. Bring our boys home. And there's no, in my opinion, there's no need for us to be in NATO in the first place, and therefore there's no reason to have NATO bases in the first place. So bring all that stuff home, or sell the equipment to the nations there, then we can make a big buck on it and pay off a bit of our debt, and just bring our boys home, and they can go back into the civilian population, if so desired. Or if they want to stay in the military, they can stay in the military and just fulfill a different role. We should be defensive, not offensive. My personal opinion, this should be renamed to the Department of War, like before the Roosevelt administration, basically saying, hey, this operates on a skeleton budget unless someone declare wars on us, in which case then we can ramp up quickly. That's the way I see it. Department of Commerce. Do we need NOAA? Not really. Census Bureau. We need that for the redistricting purpose. However, we can also change it a little bit by saying, instead of having 435 congressmen, let's do the original part, what the Founding Fathers wanted, which was the Apportionment Amendment, which basically stated for X amount of US citizen, you gain a congressional district. And I believe that would be about 250,000 per district, so that would triple the amount of House seats we have. And funny enough, it would still mean a Republican majority, for those who are complaining. National Telecommunications and Information Administration, that can go. National Institute for Standards. Sure, it's 1 billion, who cares? Agriculture Department. Well, as you can see, the vast majority of spending is because of the SNAP program, so that's food stamps. I'm fine with there being food stamps. Yeah, it's not really libertarian of me, but I'm fine with that, because the quickest way to get a revolution is for people to miss 3 meals in a row. So you want to make sure that people get their food, because otherwise there's not going to be a country, literally. So I think preliminarily, without really doing that much of calculation, I think I can already get rid of at least $1.5 trillion without really making any effort. I can already get $1.5 trillion of dollars out, which would make it a budgetary deficit of about $150 billion. Like that. And it didn't even go through any detailed calculation. So, half an hour, this is basically my proposal for anyone watching. This is how I would take care of it as a potential Treasury Secretary. Yes, this is a job application. I'll take $1 as salary. That's it. I don't want anything. Because the service of the country is more important to me than being wealthy. Thank you kindly for watching. Have a great day. See you next time. Cheers.